Call me Caleb Mercer. I'm 29, and the first real thing I ever owned was a blue duffel bag I bought from a thrift store when I was 13. I remember the plastic smell of it, the way the zipper stuttered near the corner where the teeth didn't quite line up, and how the strap bit into my shoulder while I walked out of a house that called itself a home only because the door had a wreath in December. People say memory softens the edges over time. Mine didn't. My edges stayed sharp, like the cold tile in our kitchen the night my parents told me I was nothing but dead weight. Those were the words, flat, clinical, like a diagnosis, dead weight. I can still see my father's mouth shaping them, my mother's eyes flicking to the clock behind me like she had somewhere better to be. I didn't argue. I learned early that arguing in that house only got you more volume. I was small, quiet, always trying to be useful, carrying groceries, raking the yard, balancing a chore list like a second backpack. But usefulness doesn't count for much when someone has decided you're a burden on sight. So I zipped that duffel, tucked in a flannel and a picture I tore from a magazine. An office building with a glass lobby and a front desk, and a man in a dark jacket holding a briefcase, looking like he belonged somewhere. And I walked out into the 2 a.m. air that smelled like dust and sprinkler water and faraway diesel, thinking maybe belonging was something you could walk toward if you just kept moving. My family was the kind that looked tidy from the sidewalk. The lawn got mowed. The trash bins never lingered at the curb longer than an afternoon. We smiled tight in church. If you stood there long enough, though, you'd see it. The little social gravity field around my sister, Tessa, drawing every compliment like lint to a sweater. She was the golden one, the kind who sang 2 measures at a school assembly and came home with flowers. My father, Gregory, would beam at her until his face looked stretched, and my mother, Marla, would press lipstick prints to Tessa's forehead and call her my star. And I would stand in the kitchen doorway holding a science project made of paper clips and corks while the dishwasher hummed, and thought maybe stars were just dots people agreed to point at. I wasn't bad. I wasn't brilliant. I took out the trash without being told. I kept my room neat. I read library books until the words blurred. But in our house, being harmless was the same as being in the way. If a glass got knocked off the counter, it was because I didn't move fast enough. If the electric bill looked high, I must have left a light on. If my father's day at work wasn't what he wanted, my quiet at dinner felt like provocation. That word, dead weight, didn't arrive out of nowhere. It was built from 100 moments where I stood holding something heavy and watched the person who handed it to me walk away. The first hint that I was being measured on a scale tilted against me came when I was 8, and Tessa was 10, and my father decided the family needed structure. He typed chore lists in bold, laminated them, and stuck them to the fridge with magnets shaped like fruit. Tessa had things like wipe table, arrange magazines, choose dessert. Mine read like a maintenance manual: sweep garage, clean baseboards, rake, wash car, carry firewood, move boxes in attic. I didn't mind working. There's a clean kind of tired that feels good and puts you to sleep. What stung was how my sister's chores got her a pat on the head and mine got me, at best, a grunt. If I finished early and stood near my father, hands hanging awkward, hoping he'd notice, he'd lean in past me and tell Tessa she was the best helper he'd ever seen. The afternoon, I raked the whole backyard alone while she sat inside lining up marshmallows on a baking sheet for some school thing. My mother found me under the maple tree and told me not to sweat in my good shirt because we didn't have money to replace it. I remember looking down at my elbows, raw and a little bloody, and realizing there are people who will ask you to break yourself and then scold you for the noise you make when it hurts. You don't decide to run away in one breath. It happens inch by inch, the way frost creeps over a window. Money was tight in our house, or that's what I was told whenever I asked for a new pair of sneakers. We ate a lot of casseroles, and my father kept a ledger on his nightstand with neat columns of numbers that meant no to anything that wasn't already on a list. But when Tessa wanted piano lessons, the ledger became a story about investing in talent. When she wanted a trip to some choir competition, it turned into a story about opportunity. When I wanted a used graphing calculator, it was a hard lesson about sacrifice. Be a man, my father said, pushing the duct-taped calculator back across the table at me. Make do. That was the thing about our house. The words of praise were poetry, the words of denial were slogans, and the echo of both lived in your bones. When I was 13, my school counselor called home after I fell asleep in class. I'd stayed up late studying in the bathroom with the fan on so the light wouldn't show under my door. My father didn't like lights after 10. I thought maybe the counselor would talk to them about giving me more space, maybe a different corner to do homework, maybe a room that wasn't stacked with bins of seasonal decorations I had to keep tiptoeing around. My mother took the call with the receiver wedged against her shoulder while she folded laundry. When she hung up, she stared at me like I'd embarrassed her personally. "You're always making trouble," she said quietly, so quietly it hurt more than a shout. "You drag us down." My father came home with that sentence already in his mouth. I could tell you about shelters, but I'll keep that brief. Shelters are fluorescent and loud and smell like everything at once: bleach, socks, wet coats, fried food, hope. There are rules, and the rules change depending on who's at the desk. If you're small, and keep your eyes down and say thank you like you mean it, there's an auntie somewhere who will slide you an extra sandwich. I found work at a diner washing dishes until my hands were permanently pruned, then at a warehouse loading boxes, then sweeping at a mechanic's where the owner, Dave, taught me the names of tools and the quiet math of leverage. He gave me a cot in the back room after he realized I was sleeping sitting up in the break area because I didn't want to bother anyone. I went to school, then work, then back to school for the last bell, then back to work. I learned to fold my life like a map, quick, efficient, so it would fit in the duffel without wrinkling. I don't mention this part to make anyone feel sorry. It was the honest portion of my life, the part where the equation of effort equaled outcome. If I scrubbed a pan until it shone, someone smiled. If I lifted the heavy pallet without complaining, someone said, "Nice job, kid." When you've grown up being told you are dead weight, the first time someone calls you strong feels like you've been handed a name. I didn't see my family again for years. Tessa's milestones arrived as rumors. Her prom dress was timeless. Her senior solo brought down the house. Her college acceptance proved all our sacrifices were worth it. I was not included in the hour. I got postcards from the school district about changing bus routes I no longer rode. I got a letter with my name misspelled saying I hadn't turned in a form for a field trip I hadn't known about. I kept moving, kept working, and the glass lobby picture from the magazine got taped inside a notebook cover until the edges curled. Somewhere around 19, I realized I wasn't thinking about survival anymore. I was thinking about building. A friend from the warehouse told me about a night class in bookkeeping. A woman at the diner gave me a worn copy of a small business manual and said I had the kind of brain that could make order out of mess. I learned how to read a profit and loss statement like it was a language. I learned how to sit up straight in a chair and ask questions that made people think I knew more than I did. It turns out curiosity looks a lot like confidence if you speak slowly and take notes. I won't pretend the path from dishwater to an office with my name on the door was a clean line. I stacked failures like bricks and figured out how to stand on them. There was a landscape crew that didn't last a summer, a web design agency that was really just me and a laptop in a booth at the diner, a delivery service where the van broke down so often I learned the smell of overheating belts. The first thing that worked wasn't flashy. Inventory management for small shops that couldn't afford the big systems. A grocer needed to know how many cartons of eggs to order without empty shelves on Friday. A boutique wanted to stop bleeding cash into backroom boxes with tags from last season. The software existed, but it was expensive and assumed everyone was operating at scale. I listened, built something simple, and parked my little service between the cracks. 10 clients turned into 30. 30 turned into 100. I learned about hiring and letting go. I learned about leases and negotiated my first one sitting across from a landlord with a tie clip shaped like a sailboat, pretending my hands weren't shaking. One morning I walked into a downtown building, the kind with marble underfoot, a front desk where someone looked up when the door whooshed, a coffee shop with a chalkboard menu in real cursive, and the security guard nodded and said, "Morning, Mr. Mercer." I nodded back and didn't smile until I was alone in the elevator, where I pressed both palms against the cool steel wall and breathed and thought about the photo I'd taped in my notebook. By then, I had a team who knew their jobs better than I did. A receptionist named Lila who handled the phones like she was conducting an orchestra, and a view that wasn't spectacular but did show a slice of sky that changed color like it was reminding me time was moving. I found a rhythm: meetings, whiteboards, coffees gone cold, the quiet thrill of helping a client fix a leak in their business that had weighed them down for years. There's something deeply satisfying about turning chaos into a neat table with columns that add up, about watching stress drain from someone's face when they finally see what was happening to their own money. I wasn't rich in any storybook sense, but I had stability, room to breathe, a refrigerator with more than a jar of mustard in it, and a desk that was mine. I'd built this life brick by brick, and sometimes after hours I'd sit with the lights low and the city going soft outside and let myself feel a kind of quiet pride I never allowed anywhere near the daylight. The past has a way of knocking anyway. It arrived first as a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize and almost didn't return. "Hi, this is Marla." A woman's voice said, tiny and careful, like she'd borrowed it from someone else. "Please call me." I stared at my phone so long the screen dimmed. I had not heard my mother's voice in 16 years. The second voicemail was from my father. Fewer syllables, more gravel, still that sense he was speaking into a mirror rather than a person. "We need to talk." He did not say my name. I let both messages sit for a day because some decisions deserve a pause, and because listening to them made my heart do that old, unwelcome thing where it tried to climb into my throat. The third message came through in the late afternoon, Lila's voice on the intercom. "Caleb, there's, two people downstairs asking if they can see you. They say they're your parents." There are moments when everything around you keeps moving. The printer whirs, someone laughs in the hallway, a truck breaks out on the street, and inside your chest, everything goes still. I could have told Lila to send them away. "Tell them I'm not available." I might have said. "Tell them to email." My tongue touched the roof of my mouth, found the old seams of words like "not now," "not today," "not ever." Instead, I heard myself say, "Ask them to wait. I'll be down in 5 minutes." I don't know if that was strength or old muscle memory, but I stood, straightened my sleeves, and looked at myself in the glass door. I saw a man who had bought his first tie on clearance and his second at full price. A man with lines near his eyes that had not been there a year ago. A man who looked, finally, like he belonged in the picture. The lobby looked different that day, like a stage set I'd stumbled into. The desk lamp made a low circle of light on the marble. The security guard, Joseph, who kept peppermints in his pocket, nodded at me, then flicked his eyes toward the seating area. They were there on the tufted bench beneath the ficus, smaller than I remembered, like time had gone through them with a careful pair of scissors. My mother sat with her hands folded around a tissue that had already given up. My father sat with his knees apart, his elbows on them, the pose that used to mean I was about to get a lecture. They looked up together when my shoes clicked on the floor. For a second, one of those long seconds you could build a house in, none of us spoke. I thought about the boy with the blue duffel bag and how quiet he had been, how quiet he still was under everything I'd built. Then my father cleared his throat, an old metronome restarting. "Caleb," he said finally, like he was testing the name for cracks. "We're here because we need your help." If you've ever been asked for a favor by someone who never offered you one, you know the way the word help can fracture in the air. I felt my shoulders roll back on their own. My mother stood as if she couldn't decide whether to hug me or apologize or both. She did neither. "It's the house," she said, the tissue twisting. "There were complications. Your father, well, we took out a second mortgage when Tessa opened the studio, and then there were property tax issues, and then your father's hours got cut, and—" She stopped, swallowed, and started again. "They're going to take it, Caleb, next month. We thought maybe if we could just talk." I watched her eyes move over my face like she was reading a weather map. My father didn't apologize. He looked around the lobby instead, at the clean lines and the little coffee station and the people who walked through carrying laptops, and he said, almost like he couldn't help himself, "So this is where you ended up." I had imagined this moment 100 ways without letting myself admit I was imagining it. In some versions I said nothing and walked away. In others I laughed, a sound I knew would echo too loudly here. In the version that played out, I did something simple. I gestured to the chairs near the window, the ones with the low table between them where we sometimes set out brochures for tenants moving in upstairs. "Let's sit," I said, and when my father hesitated, not at the invitation, but at being invited in a place where he did not control the chairs, I saw the flash of the man I'd grown up with, the one who measured respect like teaspoons of sugar and always kept most of it for himself. We sat. The ficus leaves made soft shadows on the floor. A woman walked through in heels that made no sound. My mother held the tissue like it was a life preserver. My father set his jaw. They told us you started some kind of service, he said, a shade of skepticism leaning on the words, as if he expected me to say it would all disappear the moment someone poked it. Consulting, I said. Operations, inventory, some finance. Small businesses. Right? He said, the way he used to say right, when a coach called me reliable, but not a standout. My mother darted in with a quick, bright sentence she must have practiced. We're proud of you. It landed on the table, light as a napkin, and slid. Her eyes didn't meet mine when she said it. There are places in a conversation where you can still choose what kind of story you're in. I could have reached back and handed them the gentlest version. I could have given them my best advice, called a contact at the bank, arranged a payment plan, strutted out my competence like a banner, and felt noble for a weekend. But sitting there, I could feel the old contour of our roles trying to snap back into place, like you pull a rubber band and let go, and it stings when it slaps your skin. My father leaned forward. We didn't come here for speeches, he said, the edge finally showing. We need a solution. He stared at me as if this was a test I'd always been destined to take, as if my usefulness had finally arrived in a shape that made sense to him. Transmit resources, restore the family image, and then step back into the corner where I'd be allowed to exist. My mother touched his sleeve in a hushed gesture she'd used my whole childhood when he started to sound like that. Greg, she murmured. Please. She looked back at me. Caleb, sweetheart, we're frightened. We made mistakes. But this house, it's our whole life. She paused, searching my face again. You understand. I understood many things in that moment. I understood that my parents were capable of showing up when they needed me, and only then. I understood that the word we made mistakes was a blanket tossed over a set of choices that had always excluded me. I understood that Tessa had opened something, the studio, my mother had said, and that my parents had dug into the foundation of our old house to support it, and now that foundation was cracking. I understood that I was sitting where the man in the magazine picture had once stood, not because I'd been invited in, but because I had made a door for myself and walked through it. I understood, in a way that was less a thought than a settling in my bones, that this conversation would decide not just a house, but the story I would tell myself about who I was in relation to the people who had once called me dead weight. Joseph the guard shifted at his post. Lila glanced over from the desk and gave me a small nod like she was reminding me I didn't have to do anything that didn't feel right. My father cleared his throat again. My mother blinked fast. Somewhere upstairs, the elevator chimed. Outside, the sky moved a shade brighter, then back. I leaned back in my chair, let the silence grow until it felt like a room by itself, and looked them both in the eye as I opened my mouth to say just one word. My father was the first to break the silence after I leaned back in my chair. He didn't wait for me to answer. He filled the air with his own expectations. I assume you've got the means to fix this, he said, like he was ordering at a diner, not asking for help from the son he once pushed out the door. You've done well for yourself, clearly. It's time you did something for your family. He let the word family hang there, sticky and sharp, as if the years between us hadn't happened, as if the nights I spent hungry or folded into a shelter cot could be erased by one convenient memory lapse. My mother reached for my hand like she used to when company came over, and she wanted me to play the role of quiet, obedient son. Sweetheart, you've always been so capable, she said, her voice sliding back into the syrupy tone she used whenever she wanted something. We gave everything to raise you. Don't you think it's time to return the favor? My throat tightened at the phrase. I could picture her standing in the laundry room years ago, whispering to herself that I was a burden, that every dollar spent on me was a waste. And yet here she was, framing it as sacrifice, rewriting history right in front of me. Then came Tessa's name. My mother said it like an amulet. Your sister has been through so much stress with the studio. It was supposed to be her dream, you know? She can't afford to see it collapse because of us. Think of her, Caleb. She's counting on you. My father nodded firmly, reinforcing it. She deserves this. She's worked hard. We all pulled together for her, and now it's your turn. My chest burned. That word, deserves, slid into me like ice water. I thought about the time they scraped together thousands for her piano, while I was told a secondhand calculator was too much. I thought about the trips, the dresses, the applause she received for existing in the light they shined on her. And now they wanted me to underwrite it all again, as if my role had always been to stand in the shadows and hold the weight. I sat there, their voices piling on, each sentence another brick of the old wall I'd once climbed over with a duffel bag in my hand. My father spoke in absolutes, the way he always did. You will do this because it's the right thing. My mother dabbed at her eyes, the tears more rehearsed than raw. She leaned in close enough for me to smell the perfume I remembered from church Sundays and whispered, "Don't embarrass us, Caleb. Think of the family name." That was when I realized they weren't here to ask. They were here to corner me, to maneuver me back into the role they thought I never should have left. They saw my office not as proof of what I'd built, but as their ticket out of a mess they'd made. They thought my success was still theirs to claim, as though the years they had denied me didn't exist. I could feel the tension winding tighter inside me, every word pressing down. And somewhere in the middle of it, I caught myself remembering 13-year-old me, staring at that laminated chore list on the fridge. All I wanted then was for someone to look me in the eye and see me, not as dead weight, not as an embarrassment, not as a tool for someone else's ambition, but as a person who mattered. And now, here I was again, back in their script, the spotlight aimed at Tessa, the commands falling on me. My mother leaned forward one last time, her voice trembling with that mixture of desperation and control. "Caleb, if you don't do this, if you don't step up, you'll be tearing this family apart." And that sentence, loaded, manipulative, heavy as stone, hung in the air between us, waiting for me to carry it like I always had. My father leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, and gave a small laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "You know," he said, "I always told your mother this day would come." I said, "Caleb will make something of himself one day, and when he does, he'll finally understand loyalty." He looked at me with the same narrowed eyes I remembered from childhood, the ones that always seemed to be searching for the flaw. And here we are. Don't make me regret believing that, son. The word son tasted like vinegar when it came from him. It wasn't affection, it was possession, a reminder of who he thought had authority. My mother's hand slipped onto my arm, the tissue in her fingers brushing my sleeve. "It's not just about us, Caleb," she said. "If we lose the house, Tessa's studio goes under too. She'll be ruined." Her voice caught, and then she pulled something from her purse. At first I thought it was another tissue, but then I saw the paper edges, the official stamp in the corner. She slid it across the table like a dealer pushing cards. It was a copy of the loan documents. I scanned the names, and my heart lurched. Next to my father's signature was another one, mine. Except it wasn't mine. "Of course you don't remember signing," my mother said quickly, her voice shaky but rushing forward like a flood she couldn't stop. "You were young. It was just paperwork. We told you it was for something else. We thought," she glanced at my father, "we thought it would be fine. That by the time anything came of it, you'd be able to handle it." My father didn't flinch. He sat there, steady, as if he'd been waiting for me to notice. "We needed collateral," he said flatly. "We used your name. You should be grateful. It gave us the leverage to get Tessa what she needed. And look, it worked out for you too. That's what family does. We lift each other." My throat went dry. I looked again at the paper, at the slanted attempt at my signature, the lines of ink pretending to be my hand. I thought about the nights I spent in shelters, the jobs that left my palms raw, the weight of the duffel digging into my shoulder. All of it carried out under the belief that at least my name was still my own. And here it was, scribbled away, bartered without permission, tied to a debt I never agreed to. "You forged my name," I said slowly, my voice low enough that it almost startled me. The words tasted heavy, like iron. My mother shook her head fast, her tissue unraveling. "No, no, it wasn't like that, sweetheart. It was just a signature, just to help the family. We thought you'd understand when you were older." Older. That word scraped against me. I had been forced to grow older the night I walked out with nothing but a duffel bag. I had been older when I scrubbed dishes until my skin cracked. Older when I slept behind dumpsters because there wasn't room at the shelter. Older when I taught myself to read the ledgers my father kept hidden. Older every step of the way because they'd stripped childhood from me before I'd even known what it was worth. Now, staring at their calm faces, I realized they weren't ashamed. They weren't even afraid. They thought they had every right. They thought blood gave them permission to steal not just my years, but my name, my signature, my future. And in that moment, something broke. Not quietly, not invisibly, but sharp and final, like glass shattering in a silent room. I walked out of the lobby with the loan papers still burning in my hand. I don't even remember saying goodbye, or if they called after me. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. All I know is that the marble floor under my shoes seemed louder than usual, and every step away from them sounded like something inside me cracking. The elevator ride up to my office felt like being trapped underwater. No air, no movement, just that weight pressing in from all sides. By the time I shut my office door, my chest hurt so much I thought I might collapse right there at my desk. I sat down and stared at the fake version of my signature. My name, scrawled by someone else's hand. My identity, stolen, twisted, used without a second thought. I had spent so many years trying to build a life where my name meant something, where it carried weight because of what I had done with it. And here it was, reduced to a tool for someone else's convenience. I pressed my thumb against the paper, as if I could rub it out, erase the ink with sheer force. But it didn't budge. It was permanent. For the first time in years, I felt 13 again. Small, powerless, disposable. The same kid who listened through thin walls to his parents whisper about bills, only to hear his own name spoken like a problem. The same kid who carried firewood until his arms ached, only to be told he wasn't doing enough. The same kid who was called dead weight, in a kitchen where the light bulb buzzed louder than any praise. I thought I had buried that boy under everything I'd built, but he was still there, kneeling in my chest, begging for air. That night, I didn't go home. I sat in the office long after everyone else left, the city lights bleeding into the glass. I ordered takeout I didn't eat. I read and reread the loan papers until the words blurred. Collateral, obligation, default. Words that were supposed to be neutral but felt like shackles when I saw them next to my forged name. My mind ran in circles. What if the bank came after me? What if everything I'd built, every contract, every client, every ounce of progress, I could lose it all because of them? Because of their lies? For a moment, I let myself spiral. I thought about giving in, just writing the check, paying it off, walking away from the pain in exchange for peace. It would have been easy. One transaction and the problem would vanish. But that thought made my stomach twist. It wouldn't vanish. It would live in me forever as proof that they were right. That my role in the family was to clean up the mess, to take the blame, to carry the weight. If I gave in now, I'd be stepping right back into the role they carved out for me before I even had the chance to decide who I wanted to be. The walls of my office felt too close, the air too heavy. I left the building and walked. No destination, no plan. Just step after step, city block after city block, the night pressing against my shoulders. At one point, I passed a diner, bright lights, smell of grease and coffee, and I saw a kid inside wiping down tables. He couldn't have been older than 14. His shoulders were slumped, but when the manager walked by, he straightened up, forced a smile. I froze there on the sidewalk, staring through the glass, until the kid looked up and our eyes met. Just for a second. But in that second, I saw myself, hands raw, heart pounding, waiting for someone to notice I was trying. I kept walking, but something shifted. I realized I couldn't afford to collapse. Not now. Not with everything at stake. That forged signature might have been a betrayal, but it was also a map. A map of exactly how low they were willing to go. And if I wanted to make it out of this without letting them drag me back into the role they'd always forced on me, I needed to start thinking, not as their son, not as the kid who ran away, but as the man who had built something they couldn't even understand. By the time dawn started painting the sky gray, I found myself back at the office. I sat at my desk, loan papers spread out again, but this time I didn't look at them with panic. I looked at them with cold clarity. My parents thought they had trapped me, that they could guilt me or manipulate me into saving them like nothing had ever happened. But now I knew. I knew how far they'd go. And knowing that, I also knew something else. The only way forward was to stop playing their game altogether. I wasn't ready yet. I was still raw, still reeling, still bleeding from wounds I hadn't touched in years. But deep down, beneath the ache and the anger, something was starting to spark. A small, quiet thought. Maybe I didn't have to be the one on the defensive anymore. Maybe, for once, I could choose the terms. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Lila, not my closest colleagues, not even the few friends who knew bits of my past. The betrayal was too raw, too humiliating, and I wasn't ready for pity. Instead, I buried myself in work. But not the usual grind. It was sharper now, more focused. Every number on a spreadsheet, every client meeting, every contract I read line by line. It all became fuel. If my parents had tried to make me the collateral in their scheme, then I would become the one thing they couldn't reduce to paperwork, untouchable. That month, my company signed two of our biggest clients yet, a chain of regional grocery stores and a logistics firm that had been bleeding money for years. I poured myself into those projects, working 16-hour days, not because I needed the income, but because every success became armor. The stronger the business grew, the less likely anyone could yank it out from under me. And strangely, instead of collapsing under the weight, I thrived. I found myself walking taller, speaking with a confidence I didn't have before. People noticed. Lila started introducing me to visitors not just as Mr. Mercer, but as the founder. I caught glimpses of respect in the eyes of clients who had once tested me with condescension. Meanwhile, I quietly began to gather information. I called in favors from people I'd helped years before. A lawyer client owed me, and I asked him to look into the validity of the loan documents. His verdict was clear: forgery, plain and simple. If I wanted, I could press charges. That knowledge settled into me like a hidden blade. I didn't wield it yet, but knowing it was there gave me a calm I hadn't felt since discovering the papers. Outside of work, life also began to shift. I upgraded my apartment to a place with high ceilings and tall windows, not because I needed the space, but because I wanted to remind myself daily that I had climbed out of the dark. I reconnected with a few people from my shelter days, men and women who had also clawed their way up in different ways. We met for dinners, swapped stories, laughed about things that once seemed unbearable. Being around them reminded me that my parents' opinion of me was not the only truth, and maybe never had been. Every small step felt like a piece of the puzzle locking into place. My name began appearing in industry articles. An investor approached me at a conference, praising my model. I shook hands with CEOs who once would have walked past me without a glance. In quiet moments, I thought about 13-year-old me, the boy who folded a magazine picture into his notebook. If I could have shown him where I was now, he might not have believed it. But even as things improved, the shadow of my parents lingered. They hadn't disappeared. They left messages, more insistent each time. My father's tone grew harsher, accusing me of being selfish, warning me about turning my back on blood. My mother's voicemail swung between desperate tears and carefully rehearsed guilt trips. They sent letters too, handwritten, with words like family underlined twice. One even included a photo of the house, as if bricks and paint would be enough to erase the years of damage. I didn't respond. Not yet, because quietly, without telling them, I was preparing. I had the legal proof of their forgery, the financial stability to stand without fear, and a growing network of allies who respected me not for what I had escaped, but for what I had built. For the first time in my life, the scales felt like they were tipping, not in their favor, but in mine. And as that realization took root, so did the beginning of an idea. An idea that maybe I didn't have to just say no. Maybe I could show them, in a way they would never forget, that the boy they called dead weight had become the man holding all the weight they could never lift. The more I ignored their messages, the more desperate they became. My father left voicemails in that clipped, demanding tone I remembered so well, half command, half threat. Caleb, don't think you can run from this. That house is part of your legacy. If you let it go, you'll regret it. My mother's calls were softer, but more poisonous. Please, sweetheart, your father's blood pressure is through the roof. I don't know what we'll do if you don't help. Think of Tessa. Her whole future is at risk. They alternated between pressure and guilt so seamlessly that I almost wondered if they were rehearsing together before dialing. But their words didn't pierce me the way they once did. Instead, each message hardened something inside me. I knew I couldn't let them trap me in their script again. If they had forged my signature once, what else had they done? That question gnawed at me until I called the lawyer back and asked him to dig deeper. A week later, he sat across from me with a thin folder and a raised eyebrow. They didn't just use your name for that loan, he said. They've been attaching you to other paperwork too. Smaller things, utilities, property filings, even a credit card application years back that was denied. It looks like they were setting a pattern. Honestly, Caleb, it's lucky you caught it now. Another couple of years, and you might have been dragged into bankruptcy without ever realizing it. The words hit me like a punch. For years, I had assumed my parents' neglect was passive, that they simply didn't care enough about me to waste energy. But this was active, calculated. They had been using my absence as cover, leveraging the son they discarded to prop up the daughter they worshipped. Suddenly, all those years of silence made a brutal kind of sense. They hadn't reached out because they loved me. They'd kept me in the shadows because I was more useful there. That night, I sat by the tall window in my apartment, the city lights bleeding across the glass, and I thought about power. Not the loud kind my father always wielded, the raised voice, the slammed door, the iron command at the dinner table. That wasn't power. Real power was quieter. It was information, leverage, the ability to choose when and how to reveal what you knew. And for the first time, I had more of it than they did. The next step was positioning myself where their desperation couldn't touch me. I reached out to one of the grocery chain executives I'd been consulting for. During a late-night meeting over spreadsheets and takeout, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You ever thought about expanding into acquisition work? With your track record, you could be advising at the investment level. Big picture, bigger clients." The idea planted itself immediately. If I built that arm of my business, I wouldn't just be someone who cleaned up other people's messes. I'd be someone who had the power to decide which ventures lived and which died. I threw myself into it. I hired 2 more analysts, rented another floor in the building, and began cultivating connections in real estate and finance. Within 6 months, I wasn't just running operations for small shops. I was advising investors with portfolios worth more than my parents could dream of. I had meetings in boardrooms they wouldn't even be allowed to enter. And with each step, the fear that they could destroy me with their schemes grew smaller, replaced by something else: anticipation. Because I started to see it clearly now. Their desperation, their forged papers, their blind faith in Tessa's studio, all of it was a tower built on sand. And here I was, standing on solid ground, with the means to topple it if I chose. I didn't have to wonder anymore if I was strong enough. I was in a position not just to say no, but to decide how loudly that no would echo. Then, almost as if fate wanted to hand me the final piece, I learned something that turned my simmering anger into cold resolve. A contact in real estate pulled me aside after a meeting and said, "Funny coincidence. Your parents' house came across my desk last week. It's tied to that loan they're defaulting on. The lender's preparing to sell it at auction. Quiet listing for now, but in a few months it'll be open." I felt my pulse steady, not quicken. The house, the one they had clung to like it was proof of their legacy. The one they had mortgaged into oblivion to build a pedestal for my sister. The one they had come begging me to save. Soon it wouldn't even belong to them anymore. And now I knew exactly where it was headed. Onto a market I was already positioned to influence. That was the moment the sparks in my mind caught fire. I didn't need to yell at them, or argue, or prove myself with words. I didn't need to stoop to their manipulation. All I needed to do was wait, prepare, and be standing in the right place when the ground gave way beneath them. The auction date circled closer on the calendar, though my parents didn't know I had already learned about it. They still left messages on my phone, still played their rehearsed roles, my father demanding, my mother pleading, both of them weaving Tessa's name into every other sentence. I listened once or twice, then stopped. I didn't need their words anymore. I had my own plan, and I wasn't going to waste the chance fate had practically dropped into my hands. The morning of the auction, I arrived early. The courthouse steps were cool under my shoes, the kind of place where men in suits shuffle papers and speak in low, efficient voices. There were maybe a dozen bidders, some local real estate investors, a couple of brokers I recognized from past meetings. The air was casual, routine for them. For me, it was something different. I wasn't just here to buy property. I was here to reclaim something that had been stolen from me, not in brick or wood, but in the weight of my name. The house appeared on the docket halfway through. The auctioneer rattled off the numbers, the opening bid lower than I expected. A man in a gray blazer started the bidding, followed by another who clearly wanted to flip it. The price ticked upward. I kept my hands folded in my lap, calm, waiting. Let them circle, let them think it was theirs. When the room quieted for the first time, I lifted my hand. Bid. My voice was steady, low, without a hint of strain. The auctioneer nodded. The numbers climbed again, but I didn't flinch. Every time another bidder raised, I raised higher. Each movement felt deliberate, like laying bricks into a wall only I could see. Finally, The others hesitated. The gray blazer shook his head, muttering that it wasn't worth it. Another man dropped out after a final glance at his notes. And then it was mine. With one sharp strike of the gavel, the house my parents had sacrificed me for, the one they had mortgaged with my forged name, belonged to me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply signed the papers, tucked them into my briefcase, and walked out. The sun was bright on the courthouse steps, almost too bright, and for a moment I just stood there, letting it sink in. I hadn't just bought a house. I had taken back control of the story they thought they owned. 2 weeks later, my parents showed up at my office again. They didn't have an appointment. Lila called me, whispering nervously that they were downstairs, insisting they had to see me. This time, I told her to let them in. I wanted them to look me in the eye. When they entered, my mother's face was drawn, her eyes red from crying. My father looked angrier than I'd ever seen him, like the world itself had betrayed him. He didn't bother with small talk. "We heard you were at the auction," he said flatly. Did you take it?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence settle. Then I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the folder, and slid the deed across the table. My father's jaw clenched. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Caleb," she whispered, you bought it?" I leaned back, just like I had in the lobby weeks earlier. "Yes, I did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. My father's face turned red, the vein at his temple pulsing. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. "You think taking our home makes you better than us?" His voice rose, echoing in the quiet office. My mother's voice came next, soft but cutting. "Why would you do this to us? To your own family?" I looked at them both, calm, unshaken. "Family," I said, letting the word linger, "doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't throw a 13-year-old boy out and call him dead weight. Family doesn't use someone's name as collateral for their golden child's dreams. What you lost wasn't a house. What you lost was the right to keep calling yourselves my family." Their faces shifted, anger, shock, denial, like a storm turning in seconds. My father opened his mouth again, but this time, I raised a hand and cut him off. "The house is mine now. Legally, permanently. You made your choices, and now you're living with them." I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The calm in my voice was louder than any rage could have been. That was when I saw it. The first flicker of realization in their eyes that they hadn't just lost a house. They had lost their grip on me forever. My father was the first to break. The color drained from his face, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for an argument that no longer existed. For years, his voice had been iron. Commands and judgments barked like gospel. But now, faced with the deed lying between us, he looked small. His shoulders slumped, his words stumbled. "You can't, you wouldn't really." He stopped, swallowed, then tried again. "This is our home, Caleb. Everything we built, everything we sacrificed. You can't just take it away." The words might have landed once. They might have dug under my skin when I was 13, desperate to believe that sacrifice meant something noble instead of what it really was, me being pushed to carry burdens that were never mine. But now, they slid off me like rain on glass. My mother leaned forward, her hands trembling as she reached for mine across the table. I didn't move. Her tissue slipped from her fingers onto the floor. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this. Think of Tessa. She'll be crushed. She's already struggling with the studio, and without the house, she'll have nothing." Her voice cracked on the last word, as if she wanted me to feel the weight of it, to imagine my sister broken and helpless. But I did imagine it. I imagined all the years they had handed everything to her, the lessons, the trips, the applause, while I was left with duct-taped calculators and accusations of being dead weight. I imagined them twisting my absence into a tool, forging my name so they could fund her dreams. And suddenly, I realized that what they were mourning wasn't the loss of a house. It was the loss of control. I stood slowly, gathering the deed back into my folder. My father's eyes followed the movement like he wanted to leap across the desk and rip it from my hands. But he didn't. He couldn't. Not anymore. "You'll regret this," he muttered, though the threat sounded thin, hollow. My mother began to cry, not loud sobs, but the soft, defeated kind that echo when someone realizes the world has shifted without them. I walked to the door, pausing only once. I turned back to face them, both sitting there in the office they thought they could invade, the sun they thought they could bend still standing tall before them. "You called me dead weight once," I said quietly. But today, I proved I was the one thing you could never carry. And now, you'll live with the weight of losing me. My father's mouth fell shut. My mother buried her face in her hands. I opened the door and stepped out into the hall, where the light from the windows spilled across the floor. With each step away, I felt that 13-year-old boy with the duffel bag fading further and further behind me. The house was mine now. My name was mine. My life was mine. And for the first time, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was freedom.